Good afternoon, everybody. How you doing? Ready for another installment of unedited, uncut devotions with Pastor Troy in the 1002 Bible reading plan. And now we're in Romans. What a great book. If you haven't been reading along, jump into Romans. It is a book that will change your life if you journey through it together. In fact, you could just spend the whole year reading the book of Romans, not just take a year to read it, but just reading through Romans again and again and again, because it is Paul's thesis on the gospel, his concise, particular statement of what is the gospel. To understand the book of Romans would be to get it well. So I would challenge you to read and understand the book of Romans. Spends the first 11 chapters giving the insight into what the gospel is. And then when we get to Romans chapter 12, we maybe have two of the most practical verses in the book of Romans. And it was in our reading this week. And so I'm going to read it to you and we're going to talk about it a little bit today. Paul says, therefore, he's talking about in light of the gospel and the reality of the gospel, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is true worship. And do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is good, pleasing, and perfect, the will of God. So let's walk through that just a little bit. He says, I urge you. I don't know if you understand the meaning of the word, but literally it's the idea of an impulse, almost to push. When I was a young dad, there were two ways that I would urge my children to do things that they didn't want to do. For example, to jump off of a dock into the water, or to jump off of the high dive. One way to urge them would be to go before them, to jump in there, and then from that position to call them to me, And then there's another way, would be to go with them to the board and then to give them the urging through my momentum to push them in the water. And I believe both of these senses is there in the gospel. In light of the mercies of God, Paul is urging us, literally calling us to come where he is and to understand what he's doing, and also pushing us to embrace this gospel because it is pleasing to God. And he's saying, I want you to present your whole life. Do you see what he's saying here when he says, present your bodies as a living sacrifice? He talked about being dead to sin, but alive to God. He talks about in other epistles as we were once dead because of sin, but now we're alive because of Christ. But the whole idea of living, he says, I live no longer in the flesh for myself, but I live for God. In Galatians, he said, I'm crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God. And so being a living sacrifice means that you live no longer for your good and your glory, but because of the life of Christ in you, you live for God. So you're alive, but you've sacrificed your desires for God's. And guys, really, what do you give up when you sacrifice yourself for God? Only what doesn't matter. And what do you gain? Everything that does. A great missionary once said, he is no fool to give up what he could never, no, how does it go? Let's see. I'm confused. He is no fool to give up what he would surely lose to gain what he could never lose, or something like that. I'll check my references and get back to you. But let's get back to the verse. And then verse 2 says this: don't be conformed to this age or this world, but be transformed. Two critical words. One is the idea of being pressed into a mold. This world is trying to conform us to its image, to make us, to look like it, act like it, talk like it, be like it. And we know that this world is passing away, and also its lust. And Jesus said, but the one who does the will of God abides forever. But Paul says that involves a transformation, literally a metamorphosis. The idea of metamorphosis is a caterpillar can become a beautiful butterfly, literally changing forms. So the world is trying to press us into its mold, but God wants us to be transformed into the image of God. Literally, Paul talks about from glory to glory, from one state to even a better state. And so God is calling us to be transformed. And then look how he says it: by the renewing of your mind. The renewing of your mind, so that you not are having the thoughts of yourself, but literally are having the thoughts of God. Guys, how do you do that? Why do we spend time in the Word? Why do we read our Bibles? So it changes our minds. To think not like the world, but to think God's thoughts. To behave in God's ways. To be obedient to Him. So there's the challenge, guys. Present your body as a living sacrifice to God. Don't be conformed to this world. It's tough. But literally be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Why? So that you'll know God's will, and so that you will be able to live in that pleasing and perfect will. What a challenge from Romans chapter 12.